I thought maybe we would begin at our beginnings, because a lot of you guys, I assume, are thinking about making a career in this business, or are dreaming about it, or are already starting. You kind of wonder, like, what does it take? And in 5 years, can I still be doing it? In 10 years, in 40 years, could I still be doing it? So because we've run the race, I guess, I think if we go back to the beginning, this idea of being curious, of waking up every morning, kind of going, whew, another day. There are people in the world who wake up every day with a list of things to do. I'm going to do the laundry, I'm going to go to quarter, I'm going to go to the soccer game, I'm going to go to quarter, I'm going to do my homework, I'm going to do this. And they have a list of 12 things, and if they can do 8 of them, like, that's a good, happy day. And then there are people, this can be your sister, this can be your best friend, but then there are people who wake up in the morning and think, wow, another one. What'll I do today? They don't have a list, they have a sort of a thought of, well, maybe, oh, but maybe not. Oh, I think I'd like to, oh, I don't know if I want to do that. And these are the neurotic ones. They don't,
Are you speaking from experience?
I'm speaking about me and my wife, for example. I'm married to a woman who is a list lady. She just finishes her list. She's happy, much happier than me. And it's just, it's a good day for her if she can get things done. For me, every day is an improvisation. I never know how it's going to come out. I get scared, I worry, I think I'm going to ruin the day, and this kind of person that I am is best friends with the kind of person that she is. But I think that the storks were never communists, and they did not drop babies equally into the world. And they're these just two teams of people, and you can know them and love them, the other ones. But I'm going to guess, that we're both like the, oh my God, another day people? Or
as in being glad there's another day?
Yes.
Remember when Richard was talking about needing to silence your inner critic?
Yes.
This is absolutely true. I wake up every morning and the first thought in my head is, you are a sorry sack of shit.
Really?
Yeah.
Yeah. And then what's the next thing that you do?
Well, then I probably...
Because you would just roll over.
I do roll over. I never greet the day happily. I never greet the day eager. I am not good at getting up in the mornings. And I have to kind of get myself revved. Have any of you guys, I've turned you on to Annie Lamott in the past, Bird by Bird. She has in her mind a radio station called KQFK, K-Fucked? No, KFKD, K-Fucked?
K-Fucked, yeah.
Right, and my friend Chip Scanlon, his radio station is You Suck FM. Mine, because I'm a public radio person, has a longer title. It's You Are a Sorry Sack of Shit, and you will be found out. And then as the day goes on, I realize I don't want to be called on the carpet, and I don't want to fail, so I get something going. But it takes me, I have to kind of motivate myself.
This is not very interesting to me. We are we've had a bunch of these conversations. There is not a thing we agree on, and there is not a thing that's similar between us, yet we've both sustained. So you're going to get a 2-track explanation of how to survive in the world, because her way is not my way, and my way is clearly not her way. But let's see.
So you wake up eager.
I wake up thinking, oh boy, this is going to be a whole, I don't know what's going to happen today, but I think I'm going to try this, and I think I actually bound out of bed.
Wow.
Yeah, so that's all right. So I don't know what we do after this. Like, so then...
Have you always bounded out of bed, even when you were a kid?
Well, it's not like I haven't been sad or anything, or haven't been discouraged, but yes, I have a kind of sense that I have a chance to win. It's a very fragile sense, and you wake up with a chance that you're about to lose. Yeah,
motivation
wow. Okay.
from opposite ends.
Okay, so when you began in this business, was your mother a natural storyteller? Was your dad a great yarn? Did you have brothers and sisters who loved a good tale?
No. No.
My mother could get on an escalator in a department store. You just go to the first floor. It's like, what is it, 15 seconds, 20 seconds till you get to the first level? She could stand next to a total stranger at the bottom of the escalator, 1,000, 2, 1,000. At 25 seconds later, the lady next to her is saying, well, I divorced him because I had to. It was absolutely necessary. Like, My mother could draw people from wherever they were straight into her heart. Like it was just and my sister and I would watch this, and we both inherited it. So now...
My mother had 3 rules in life. The first one was mind your own business. The second one was don't go poking your nose. And the third one was don't you go getting a big head.
Wow. So so then what happened? Did you have brothers and sisters? How did you learn that maybe did you have a restlessness in you that said, I don't want to be in this quiet household where nobody asks rich questions? What did you do?
I can't remember the first time I ran away from home because it was pre-memory.
You were a toddler escapee?
I was, yeah. Fortunately, I lived in a small town. Everybody knew each other, so they always found me and brought me back. That was never a happy time. And my father this is a true story, my father used to pay me 25 cents if I could keep quiet and stop asking questions for 15 minutes at a time. I didn't make any money.
No. So at what point did you decide, I think I'd like to be a story person? Like, when did that happen? Like, where did it click in?
You want the true story?
Yeah.
I didn't want to be a storyteller.
Oh.
I wanted to be an astronaut, but as a girl growing up in the 50s and 60s, that wasn't allowed. I wanted to be a commercial airline pilot, but as a girl growing up in the 50s and 60s, that wasn't allowed. I wanted to be a second or a first baseman. I was really good at baseball, but as a girl growing up in the 50s and 60s, that wasn't allowed. I wanted to be an architect, but growing up where I did in the 50s and 60s, we couldn't get into shop class, which means I couldn't learn drafting, which means I couldn't be an architect. But we had a newspaper in my high school, and if you had a newspaper and you were the editor, you got the keys to the school car, and since my father wouldn't let me drive his car because I was a girl in the 50s and 60s growing up where I did, I joined the newspaper staff and got the keys to the school car, and the rest is history.
Really? All right, for Team Robert, here's what happened to me. I gave every speech at every graduation. I can still sing you the song at my nursery school class in 1952.
Would you?
Yes, I could.
But would you now?
Yes, except of course, as soon as I said that, then the song just went right. I'll come back to that. I gave graduation addresses. And my mother, when I had a role in the Mikado where I was just a gentleman of Japan, so I was just one of 50 people, we are gentlemen of Japan, my mother got a bus and drove all my cousins and the entire family to see me row 3, second to the back. And it's very rare for a Japanese gentleman to get a standing ovation from 3 rows when he hustles out in his skirt. But that was me. So I had exactly the opposite start of you. My mother was the storyteller. Stories were loved. Being on stage was important, and just the opposite.
Wow.
Okay. So you get the keys to the car. Because I was a boy growing up at the same time as you, everything was, I was in Manhattan, so they didn't have cars. But had I not been in Manhattan, I might have had the desire for a car, I suppose, and the keys would have followed. So at this point, I'm entitled, you're behind. Now, where do you go from the high school paper? How does that work for you?
I went to college, worked for the paper there, because I found I had an aptitude for this work.
Yeah.
And I didn't want to be the 2 things that were allowed to me back then. Well, the 3 things: a farmer's housewife, a teacher, or a nurse. So journalism wasn't a closed door the way other things were. And I had an aptitude for it. I always wanted to play piano. This is another true story. But my parents couldn't afford. I wanted 2 things when I was a kid. I wanted a pony and I wanted a piano. I couldn't have either. But I learned to type, and for me it was like playing the piano. I love the motion of my fingers on the keyboard. To me,
Did typing get you the advanced state in the? Did you become the editor of the newspaper?
Yes.
You did.
Yes.
Now, was there boy resistance to you being the editor? Were you the first girl editor?
This was high school. We took the boys out.
Okay,
we didn't take them out.
Yes, you took them out.
Right.
So now you're out of high school, you're out of college, and it's time to begin. And so, do you go to a newspaper, or where is newspaper?
Yeah, I've never done anything else. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And okay.
And did you start Did you start right out of school at ABC?
No, I went to law school. I thought I was going to become a lawyer. No. It's funny. I was supposed to be a storyteller now that I look back on it, but at the time I had no idea at all that I would do this for a living. None at all. My problem, I wasn't a girl and therefore in that kind of an issue. I was I think they might call it a learning disability now, but back then I noticed that other people could understand what was going on around them a little quicker than me. Like to this day, I am married to one of the smartest women, and she's very, very fast. And she has a brother who's second in his class at Harvard. He's very fast. They had a father who spoke 12 languages. I would go to their house, and the family would say to me, my father-in-law would say, "Robert, would you mind if we go and do some abstract conversation?" And I said, "Why would I mind? Of course, go away, you know." And then literally what would happen is, to my ear, I would be sitting there and they would be saying, pass the asparagus, things I understood. And then they'd say, and I had no idea what had transpired during that period. So what I often did growing up is I often explained to myself what had just happened. I was constantly...
That's fantastic.
Yes. So in addition to my mother having taken a school bus anytime I stepped in front of anyone, so I was used to being on display. The second thing was I was used to not knowing what was going on and constantly explaining everything to myself. So my walk into journalism was completely backwards. I was a law student, a very successful one. I went to a really good law firm. I got offered a fancy job. And there was something wrong with it. It was a question of my heart, I think. Plus the fact that the guy I was working for said, "I will give you a job, but really you're a little too vain and a little too strange for this particular job, and I hope that you find something else to do." So he gave me a gift. He said, "I will give you a job and you can work at this fancy place and you can tell your parents that you got the job, but you cannot have it for a year. So I'm giving you the gift of 1 year to figure out something better." Wow. Well, that's an incredible gift. Wow. Incredible. I was suddenly safe, spoken for, okay, and at large. And he said, "Just give me a call in the next year if you can." And what I did was, and this is just, this is going to be opposite what you're on my track. I went to the living room, I got a tape recorder, and I asked myself, okay, what needs explaining right now? And the President of the United States was being put on trial. It was Richard Nixon, and the technical word was impeached. And I thought, well, what does that mean? Like, does that mean he has to leave? No, he stays the president. Well, it means he's accused of something and he goes to court. Where's the court? Well, it's the US Senate. Who's the jury? 100 senators. 100 jurors? Do they all have to sit there the whole time? What if 3 of them go to the bathroom at a really important point? Senators can't be told not to go to the bathroom. They probably do go to the bathroom. Who's the judge? And I just asked all the kind of dumb questions I always ask about everything. I wrote down all the questions. I looked up all the answers. I went into the living room. I got a tape recorder. And I then asked myself these questions, and I answered them in the voice of a famous sportscaster named Howard Cosell. I just, so it was all, I had and I did a variety of voices, and it made absolutely no sense. The idea was a good one, ask real questions about the impeachment, but the production was insane. I had about 5 voices and I wasn't that good at production, so I then have a cassette of me talking in funny voices about the President of the United States. And was with this token, I felt that I would work my way to the top of my profession.
And there you did.
Well, it was, now see, we could switch to your side first. I leave my side, leave me in hanging fire for a moment.
Okay.
You go to the newspaper. I assume that because you're a girl, you have to now deal with girl questions.
Yes, but I have found a thread here where, I think you and I are sort of like, can you have a Venn diagram with only 2 circles?
Yes, we are utterly. So far, the stories do not conjoin in any way.
But I have a conjoined story. Actually,
Oh,
two.
okay.
You did the voice of Howard Cosell. Howard Cosell was this very famous broadcaster, and he became famous largely because of his antagonistic but contrived relationship with Muhammad Ali, the boxer.
Yep.
He was a big deal, very controversial. Howard Cosell knocked on my hotel room once at 3 in the morning in New York and asked me if he could come in and party.
No.
Yeah. So there you
That's
go.
like having Abraham Lincoln try to.
Top that.
Yeah. Wow.
Top that. But here's so you said.
Wait a second. What hotel? A real hotel? Like in New York? Like in like a Hilton?
Yeah, like Manhattan.
Wow.
Yeah.
All
yeah.
right.
He was there for
Did you
something.
know who he was?
No, but I had gotten into the elevator with him earlier, and he had like 6 major babes with him, and they were going to a party, and then he went out and got really drunk, and he was trying to get back to the party, and he mistook my room for theirs.
Oh, I see.
Right,
Okay, so this
right.
was an accident. He wasn't seeking you out in particular, because
Well,
that would be amazing.
I don't like to kind of denigrate myself and think that I wasn't attractive to Howard Cosell, but you know.
Well, all right. So let's quickly walk
But
past this
here's
chapter.
Here's what's similar. So you said you see this thing on TV and you get your mics out, and what I heard you do, Robert, was just start Gatling gun questions, right? Just this out loud curiosity. What about this? What about this? What about
Yeah.
this? What about this?
Yeah.
And my route up may have been different, but my head does the same thing for some reasons. I'll give you my little story example of that. On my 3rd newspaper, started very small, worked my way up. I was covering the 2nd city, the smaller and the ickier city in this 2-city town that we covered. And I hated the job. I mean, I loved my job, but I hated the beat. And I think every journalist should have one thing that they don't have to cover because they hate it. And most people, it's obits. I loved obits.
I love obits,
I
too.
love obits.
Yeah.
What I hated covering, people don't like covering obits or cops. What I hated covering were festivals. The fair, you know, these.
I love the fair.
I hate the fair. My theory.
I particularly love the Minnesota State Fair.
Oh, God, I
I
went both.
particularly.
Food on the
One
stick.
time at the Minnesota State Fair, I saw the most incredible thing I think I've ever seen.
The butter princess.
There was a man with a real tiger, a real adult tiger, just walking around with a leash. Well, this is a tiger, so this tiger it was like a tiger walking a man, I thought, and for 25 cents. This is right. I can't believe that this actually. Maybe I dreamed it, but I don't think so. I got in a line, and they give you a leather jacket at the front of the line, and you just run at this tiger, and then this tiger goes and knocks you down. And I got on the back of the line, and I got to like 3 to the top, 2 to the top, and I went, oh God, and I couldn't run at it. Then I would go to the back, and I never ran at the tiger, but I thought, this is an amazing state and an amazing fair where a wild and apparently drugged animal would be able to swat people.
I have found 2 things in our center of our Venn diagram.
You had a thing with a tiger.
No, I didn't have a thing with the tiger. But what you're describing there is this absolute ability to live lives you wouldn't get to live and have experiences you wouldn't get to have if you weren't licensed to go out there as a
That's
journalist
true.
and ask those questions. So, I have not swatted a tiger, but I've held a panda in my lap, and I flew the Goodyear blimp.
You piloted it?
Yeah, they wouldn't let me take off and land, but you want to hear the Goodyear blimp story? It's a short one.
Yes.
Goodyear blimp came to Minnesota because it was circling over the Super Bowl, or maybe it was.
For those who don't understand this, there's a large oval air
Yeah.
balloon
It's the Hindenburg,
that floats over
right?
sports games.
Right.
When you're watching the professional football, you look up and there's a
Right.
blimp.
And they shoot the cameras. It was the first big drone, and yeah, it was like a big drone.
That's right.
And they bring it to town, and I was told to go do a story on the Goodyear blimp. So I ended up interviewing this pilot, and there are very few Goodyear blimp pilots licensed in the world, the country. And so I was asking him stuff. This was the 80s, and of course, if you've noticed, I'm interested in gender stuff. So I says, well, how many are women? And he looked at me and says, oh, there are no women. Women can't pilot the blimp. And I said, why not? And he said, they're not strong enough. I said, what do you mean? And he says, well, you got to have very strong legs, and you have to be tall because you got to do the rudders. And I looked at him and I said, I dare you to let me fly the blimp. So I flew the blimp.
He let you.
Yeah, I flew the morning. It was
Well, now, did you have issues with assignments? Did you get the boy assignments, or did you get girl assignments, or how does this work? I'm asking this because that was a different age.
Yeah.
I mean, this is actually how it went.
Yes, but I think what's important is, I know a lot of the young people I've talked to here feel like you're up against barriers and obstacles that mean you can't do what you want to do. And what I found was you've got to be willing and able to run through those barriers and obstacles if you really want to do this to get to what you want to do. Nobody opened the door for me. I had to kick it down.
Huh. Can you remember a big early kick down?
My very first job, I was desperate. I thought I was going to be living in the streets. I didn't have a job. I got a call with my very first job offer, which I needed because I was about to graduate. And I was cheeky enough to say, okay, it was a reporting job. Back then you didn't say what kind of reporting job, but I said, well, what kind of reporting job? And they said, well, what does it matter? And I said, I want it to be one of the real jobs. Huh. And the editor said, what do you mean? And I said, I'm not cute, and I don't do cute. I want a serious job covering serious issues, and I'm going to be taken seriously. So I started covering cops and court.
He said yes. You went to the courthouse.
Yeah, he thought I was kind of funny and cheeky.
Wow.
He figured if I was willing to take him on, I would take on power and take on authorities, right? Which is what we had to do back in the day.
All right, so now here's what happened to me. So I decide to take my cassette with the silly voices to every radio station from Hartford, Connecticut to Washington, D.C. I am convinced that this is a brilliant idea and everyone will snatch me up. Everyone tells me the exact same thing. Says, yeah, it's a good idea. We'll just get a law professor. Anyway, what are you? Anyway, like, and who are all these other people? And I wouldn't own to the fact that those were not other people. Finally, having run through pretty much and that was a brave thing to just walk into doors with a cassette. I only had one, so I had to go in and then wait a day for the person to listen, and then I would take it back because I didn't know how to duplicate them. So it was a long tour that I was taking, but again, I had the law job a year from now if worse came to worse. And what happened was there was an underground radio station, a left-wing radio station in New York, in a church, in a community, and I stuck the cassette into the mailbox of the station manager, who gave it to the news director, and this is just one of those things in life, I don't know what would have happened to me if the next thing didn't happen. Mm-hmm. If the phone hadn't rung, I guess I'd be talking to you. I wouldn't be at this conference because I would be a commercial lawyer. But the phone did ring, and the guy said, I don't know who you are, but could you bring you and your group in? And then a miracle takes place, more or less. This is when God kisses you on the mouth, not even on the head. The impeachment of the president actually began to happen. I had prepared for it. Now it was actually starting. And on the first night of the impeachment of the President of the United States in the House of Judiciary Committee, the gavel comes down and says, we now begin the impeachment of the president. We're going to, and there's, a bomb scare. So everybody is asked out of this room, except my company, Pacifica. It was so poor that it could only afford 5 phone calls, one from the station in Los Angeles, one from the station in San Francisco, one from the station in New York, one from the station in Texas, and we couldn't actually hang up the phone because we couldn't afford to recall and link the network back up. So it was arranged ahead of hand, unless in mortal danger, which this bomb scare didn't seem to be, everyone had to leave the room except Pacifica. Well, Pacifica on that afternoon was represented by Paz Cohen, a Chilean woman who, with no particular sense of politics, because all she thought she was going to have to do was say, this is Congressman Jones. This is Congressman Smith. This is Congresswoman, blah. But instead, she's stuck. She has to fill time in a room where nothing is happening except dogs are sniffing. So she's sitting there looking around at the carpet, she's looking around at the windows, she's looking around at the floor, she talks about the dog, she talks about the carpet, she talks about the windows, she talks about the floor, she talks about the carpet again, and then in desperation she turns to the book that she happened to have with her, which just happened to be The Anarchist's Cookbook, a bomb manufacturing manual. even for a left-wing radio station, to read a bomb manufacturing manual during a bomb scare is just over the tippy top of anything. So there's an alarm goes up in 5 cities, like, oh my God, we better send somebody to Washington who knows what this is. At that point, someone said, and I'm sitting in, because the impeachment was starting, I thought, well, even I've been on the air once at 1:30 in the morning with my tape, so now I'm just going to go and sit on a couch in that radio station. I'm going to just sit there in the radio. I'm not going to go listen to this at home. I'm going to sit in that building, which anybody could do, but I felt, so I'm sitting in the couch and the door opens and Destiny says, hey, are you the guy who did the impeachment? Would you go to Washington right now? I was in such joy and delirium. I don't even remember the train. All I remember is walking into the building at dawn the next morning, and that day, having never covered a fire, I've never done any of the things you had to do. I didn't go to the fair, I didn't cover the city council. I was sitting at the front table of the biggest story in American political history of that century, next to the John Chancellor, and Connie Chung was a kid. She was next to me. And there I was at a front table and I called. About day 2, I called the lawyer who had given me this gift. I said, John, could you turn on your radio? He says, where's my radio? He says, it's right behind your chair. Just turn on to 89.9 and wait a minute or two. And then on the radio, I said, coming up, Congressman Jones, but this goes out to John Wharton in New York City. Goodbye. So that was so then I thought, well, what I'll do is I'll just keep explaining stuff. Okay, so now
do you have as much fun doing it now as you did back then?
I do. Yeah, we should talk a little bit about that, where the fun comes from.
Where the fun comes from.
Because it is the unfun, and you should understand this. It's as Richard has said, as everyone has said, as Wendy said, it's hard work. It doesn't just happen, and it's lonely, and a lot of this is you have to make your mark, and you're always afraid that no one's going to know who you are, or you're fungible. You could be fired at any time. So it's hard, but there are compensations.
Where does the joy come from for you?
I like the idea, because essentially what happened to me was I never had to stop coming into work every day and saying, well, today I'm interested in, and I worked at CBS and ABC, but my job was always, well, let him do whatever that weird thing is he does. So I kept the weird job for 30 years at very traditional companies. And the fun for me was that I could dream every morning something that no one else was thinking about, and I could try to create it by the afternoon. And that was like a free pass to heaven for me. I mean, literally. And the other part of it, I think, was that I love the company of my colleagues. Mm-hmm. And there's something about, you'll discover that you might just find actors to be just really cool, or waiters to be really funny because they tell all these stories. But in my case, it was the journalism. The journalists were the best storytellers, the most constantly intrigued, and just the best companions. Mm-hmm. So, what about you?
Where does the fun come from? It isn't the writing. I was serious this morning when I said writing has always been really hard work for me, and I don't feel naturally talented at it. What I realized was those moments when I was out in the field, even if I was afraid to go in the first place, don't like to make the cold call, that's hard for pretty much everybody, but I was out in the field talking to people and having experiences in their life and doing things I never would have been able to do otherwise, and I would have this moment where I would look up and say, thank you, because it was just this exposure to the world that, it was a license. My notebook was a license to learn something every day.
But didn't you worry that God was going to call you up and say, I'm sorry, there's just been a terrible mistake. You apparently are enjoying yourself mightily, but your assignment actually was to cut meat at a grocery store, and you'll have to go back now.
I made my way through high school and college flipping hamburgers at a fast food restaurant. And my fear was that I'd have to go back and actually buy the place. I don't know too many journalists who, if you ask them and they're honest about it, if you say, do you feel like a fraud, they usually say yes. And I think it's because we pilot into other people's lives every day, and we're supposed to know that life, and we're supposed to then render events and facts and other lives truthfully and honestly. So every day we're kind of making stuff up, but in a way that has to be honest and credible. So I think it's very common to feel like you're going to get that tap on the shoulder, and you just got to keep moving forward and running faster than the tap will come.
And I agree with that. So now we're coming into convergence.
Yeah.
I think one of the things that has always been useful and always been important is listening.
Mm-hmm.
And I think when you heard Jacqui's stories this morning, and you just listened to the way she was experiencing, well, like the refugee camp or whatever, most of that was actually overheard or noticed over and over again. And one of the things that you can't do is you can't go wake up in the morning and say, I know, I'm going to cover the story about the girl who lost her cat, and then the cat got found in the tree, and it was all happily ever after. I'm going to now write that down. I'm going to go see it. Like, what will happen is whatever you expect the situation to be will not be what the situation will be. And your job is to get there and then get turned off your plan and turned on to the world. And that requires a kind of open heart and the ability to hear what no one is saying.
Yeah, yeah.
The reading between lines,
Yeah.
the feeling of sadness before it's spoken of. Or like everything, well, go ahead.
Well, and that delight in being surprised, in not having things turn out how you expect. I think that would be so boring. I just think it would be boring to know how things are going to turn out.
Yes.
I don't want to know. I want to discover it. So to me, this is all about discovery. There are beat reporters and general assignment reporters, and I did beat work for a long time, which means you specialize in a topic. But I tended to like general assignment because I never knew what the day was going to throw at me, and if there was a big shiny object story there, and my beat was over here, I'd want to be at that big shiny object story over there. And so I gravitated to that kind of thing. And there's this mantra in journalism. This is why my non-journalist friends don't invite me to their parties, because we're a little bit irreverent about things. But I have always believed, when you look at the world, I've stuck with journalism and nonfiction because I find it more interesting and more bizarre and more surprising than anything I've ever read in fiction, because you look at the world and you just say, you can't make this shit up.
Yes, and in my case, what happened to me was I decided I don't actually cover real City Hall or that kind of thing. My job and this Radiolab thing I do is just questions asked and then attempted answer. So it's like, it's sort of why is the sky blue kind of program. Like we begin this program where we each time up, we ask ourselves a complex question like what does it mean to be impeached? And we research it and research it and research it, and we put in all the complications, and then we do theater or whatever it takes to explain. So it's a giant musical, highly experimental explaining kind of program. So it's not like going out and
Right.
Yeah, it's different.
But there's still that notion of discovery,
Yes.
of learning something. And I think at the center of it for both of us is, and I don't know where it comes from in my life, but this innate, insatiable curiosity. I want to go everywhere and I want to know everything. But I don't want to know how it's going to turn out.
Now, do you ever worry that you're going to run out?
I was going to ask you that. I thought, well, it's getting late in the day, and I have a friend who had this theory about her sex life, and she actually believed there was a quota to the number of orgasms she could have in life. And so she would sort of pace herself, right? Because she didn't want to run out.
I see.
Yeah. And
So on an encounter with her, she would say, 7 to go, something like that.
And I had the same concern about words. Every time I finished a
really?
story, I was afraid that my quota of words had run out, and I would sit down at the keyboard the next day, and I would be out of them. And it still sometimes feels that way, so I have to kind of keep working at it. And I wanted to ask you, what do you do to keep getting better? We've both been in this world for what? We've been doing this for 40 years.
Yeah.
What do you do to keep yourself getting better so you're not just doing what you were able to do 20 years ago?
Well, in the lifetime that I've had, the technology has been so extraordinarily different from decade to decade, particularly the last 3, that the business has changed around me, even if I didn't want to. But what I actually do, and this is just, I have stayed ahead of the curve. So I started in radio, cutting tape with a razor blade, and I pasted them together. And then I moved into film, and then I moved to video, and then at each stage I just learned the new technology. So right now, I wake up in the morning, and like the other day it was snail sex. Snails are hermaphrodites, and so they both have penises and vaginas in each of them. And that morning I thought, well, what must that be like? So if you're a snail and you meet another snail, the penile part of you saying, oh, I'd love to do that. I think that would be great. But I noticed this other snail seems to have a sniffle, so I'm not going to let that snail put the penis in me because my eggs need to be protected from cold. So let me do my thing, but no, not that thing. And then the other one might have the same sense. I said, this must be extraordinarily complicated. It's like 4 people trying to agree, even though it's just 2. And I think, isn't it neat actually to be a creature where it's divided? Like the boys are the boys, the girls are the girls. And I will spend till 11 o'clock in the morning trying to figure out like what's going on in the snails. Now, where did the snail thing come? I don't know. But every day I seem to have something to worry about, which is. But then the second part of it for me is I do like to play with other people, and I choose people consciously who are out there. So this Radiolab program, I work with a fellow named Jada Bumrad, and he is an extraordinary musician. And we decided that we would take this explainer stuff and we would orchestrate it. So he turns out to be something of a true genius. He's been given a Genius Award by the MacArthur Foundation, but when I first heard what he was doing, because we were friends, he's 25 years younger than me, and so I was just a mentor. But when I heard what he was able to do, when I saw, I would throw him problems. So I'd say, I want you to make a fugue, but entirely with crows, no musical instruments. And he went and got sounds and then changed the pitches and produced a entirely crow fugue. And I said, Jad, with this kind of thing, we could do anything. We could do anything. And so we began to just play with orchestral journalism. He more or less invented it. Now I found a guy named Atish Bhatia. He was born in Delhi, went to high school in Moscow, moved to Swarthmore, Pennsylvania to college, got a PhD in math in New Jersey, and then he's like a totally cool interactive guy. He can draw. I can say, can we do this? Can we explode an elephant? Because my worry of a few weeks ago was, elephants have so many cells, and it's a mammal, it's a warm-blooded animal. That's a lot of heat in one place. When you're in the middle of an elephant, why don't you just get overheated? I could see if you're in the ear of an elephant, well, then you could get fresh air, and you could but why don't elephants explode? That was my question and he created an exploding elephant. I drew one, he blew it up with some kind of software program, and so I find that what you do is you wake up in a dream, and then you put the dream into the real world. And for that, you have to fall in love, in my case. I have to fall in love with ideas, and I essentially have to fall in love with people. So I do strategic love falling. Like Wendy, for example, is the object of my strategic love affection. So at one point recently, I said to Wendy, George Washington, that was actually George Washington's hair. All that time, he never wore a wig. He made that hair every morning. She says, he did? I said, yes, he did. And I've talked to the wig makers in Williamsburg, and they've explained how he does it. I said, Wendy, you and I are going to draw George Washington's morning dew. And she said, I don't know how to do that. I've never done that before. I said, come on, we're just going to do it. Because you do these incredible faces in San Francisco, but you've never done George Washington gets his hair done.
George Washington did his own hair?
every day, and we found all kinds of problems. Like, what does he do
This
if you put
explains
the
Donald
powder? Like, he wore dark clothes. He wore blue uniforms. He didn't wear your reds or your yellows. He wore dark. If you're going to the White House or whatever it was, in the presidential mansion in New York, in the dark clothes, and you have powder on your head, he didn't have a dandruff problem. So we had to figure out, how did George Washington solve the powder issue, which we did.
There you go.
There you go. So that's life in the fast lane. Like, it's completely insane, and it's not safe. Like that's the other part. Yeah.
And we've got to wrap up
Yes.
in a minute.
Okay.
So, if you're talking to some young person who wants to do this, isn't sure they can, isn't sure to find out whether they want to do it, and they don't have somebody giving them a gift of a year to discover it,
Here's
them?
what I would say. I would say you'd better be in love with it, or at least think you are. You'd better think, I really would love to try this. You don't have to know, but you'd really have to say, this seems so cool. I wanna, as every person before us has said, you've gotta really work hard. So, but then, the way I figure it is, you have to also have an ego. This is a job for brave people. Like, you, if you're very, very, very uncertain, I don't know how, because you start your days in such a different space, but what I think you have to do is you have to say, today, if I'm working for some guy who's an asshole, or some person who's totally uncreative, or I'm stuck in a company which doesn't really have any sense of poetry, and I would love to work with a poet, what you do is you go and you do your story, you do your radio story, you do it, and there has to be something in that story that belongs just to you. You have to be able to listen to it or look at it and say, that word there, that phrase, that idea, that moment, that's me. And on days when you don't have that, you just lie to yourself, because it's hard, and it needs pride and it needs love. It needs both. You can't do it without the pride, and you can't really, I don't think, do it without the love, because it's so hard. But if you can sustain both, you win, because the gods of journalism are jealous gods. They don't give out jobs. But for those who insist and insist and insist and insist, the gods go, all right, let them in. Because it's been 2 years of, I don't know, standing on their heads or working for that horrible person. Let them stay. So that should be your plan, is fall in love and then be stubbornly insistent that you want to stay, and try to make everything you do belong at least a little bit to you and only you.
Yep. Got it. Okay. We're going to close.